Once upon a time, there lived a young nurse named Ruth Daniels. She was just 24 years old, but the tiredness on her face made her look older. Every morning before the sun rose, Ruth would be out of her small, broken apartment and on her way to St. James General Hospital. Her white shoes were worn out, the soles almost gone, and her uniform had been washed so many times the color was fading. But Ruth never complained. She had no time for fancy things. Her only family was her younger brother, Michael, who had a rare condition that kept him in and out of the hospital. Their parents had died years ago in a car accident, and since then, Ruth had become mother, sister, and father all in one. She worked 2 jobs just to afford Michael's medicine. She took the night shifts no one wanted, cleaned up after patients no one liked, and smiled at everyone even when she had nothing left inside. That morning, Ruth was walking through the hospital hallway with her little notebook in hand. Her brown eyes scanned the patient list for the day. Then she paused. "Room 709, she whispered. "New patient." Nurse Veronica, her coworker, walked by chewing gum loudly. "Oh, that one, Mr. Douglas. Just came in last night. Old man. Super old. Like, mummy old." Ruth raised a brow. "What's wrong with him?" "No idea," Veronica said with a shrug. "He doesn't talk. Doesn't blink much either. Creepy. I gave him breakfast and he just stared at the wall. Didn't touch the food." Ruth nodded and walked off. She didn't like gossip. Everyone deserved dignity, no matter how sick or strange they were. When she opened the door to room 709, it was quiet. The room smelled like hospital soap and fresh linen. The man in the bed was thin, pale, and silent. He lay with his eyes half open, staring at the ceiling. "Good morning, sir," Ruth said softly, walking in. He didn't move. "I'm Nurse Ruth. I'll be taking care of you today." Still nothing. Ruth wasn't surprised. Many elderly patients were like this. They were tired, scared, or lost in memories. She began her routine, checked his pulse, temperature, cleaned his hands, changed his bedding gently. As she worked, she kept talking. "I have a younger brother. He's sick too. I know hospitals can feel cold sometimes," she said with a small smile. "But I promise to make this place feel a little warmer for you." She glanced up. The old man blinked. Just once. Ruth didn't make a big deal out of it. She just kept working, humming softly as she moved around the room. When she brought in lunch, he didn't eat, but his eyes followed her. "Just try a little," she said, holding the spoon gently. His lips moved slightly, but no words came out. She sat beside him. "It's okay. We'll take it slow. One day at a time." By the end of the shift, Ruth was exhausted. Her back ached. Her eyes were heavy. But before she left, she came back to room 709 one more time. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Douglas," she said. This time his lips moved again, very slowly. "Thank you." Ruth froze. Her heart beat a little faster. She looked at him. His face was still expressionless, but his eyes were on her. She smiled. "You're welcome." When she got home, Michael was coughing again. She rushed to his side, gave him his medicine, and held him close. "I'm okay," he whispered. "You don't have to pretend for me," she said. "I just want you to get better." That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. Her mind kept going back to that tiny whisper from the old man. "Thank you." She had no idea her life was about to change forever. The next morning, when Ruth arrived at the hospital, something was off. A security guard was waiting at the entrance of the nurse station. "Are you Nurse Ruth Daniels?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "You're needed in the director's office." Immediately, Ruth's stomach dropped. "Why?" "I don't know. Orders came from upstairs." She glanced at Veronica, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. Ruth walked down the hall, heart pounding, thoughts racing. Had she done something wrong? Had Mr. Douglas complained? The director's office was on the top floor. Big glass windows, fancy chairs. It always made Ruth nervous. She had never been called there before. When she entered, the director, Dr. Keene, was sitting behind the desk. A man in a black suit stood beside him. The air felt heavy. "Sit down, Ruth," Dr. Keene said. She sat. Dr. Keene leaned forward. "You've been assigned to Mr. Douglas in room 709. Correct?" "Yes, sir." The man in the suit spoke. "Mr. Douglas has taken a liking to you." Ruth blinked. "I don't understand." The man placed a folder on the table. "He has made a request. A legal one." Dr. Keene sighed and said, "Mr. Douglas wants to marry you." Silence. Ruth stared at them. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the man said flatly. "He wants you to become his wife. Immediately." Ruth stood up. "That's not funny." "No one's laughing," Dr. Keene said. "This is serious." Ruth shook her head. "I'm not marrying anyone, especially not a 90-year-old patient." The man in the suit opened the folder. Inside were forms, legal documents, a marriage certificate. Signed. "Why me?" Ruth asked, her voice shaking. The man looked her in the eye. "He says he sees something in you. Kindness. Loyalty. He insists on you or he will stop all treatment. He is very powerful." Ruth's knees felt weak. She looked at Dr. Keene for help. Dr. Keene spoke slowly. "You're behind on your brother's bills. Your rent is due. Your hours here can be cut. Unless I say yes?" Ruth whispered. They didn't answer. They didn't have to. She walked out of the office in a daze. Her world was spinning. That night, she sat beside Michael's bed. He was sleeping. A photo of their parents lay beside the lamp. She picked it up and whispered, "What would you do, Mama? Papa? I don't want to do this. But I'm so tired of fighting." The next morning, Ruth walked into room 709. Mr. Douglas looked at her. She sat down beside him. "If I say yes," she whispered, "you have to promise not to hurt me, or my brother, ever." The old man nodded once. Her hands shook. "Then I'll do it." He closed his eyes. For the first time, a tear rolled down his cheek. And so it began. Everything changed for Ruth the day she said yes. Her fingers trembled as she stepped out of Mr. Douglas's room. Her feet felt like they were walking through water. The hallway looked longer than usual. The walls felt tighter. She held her notebook to her chest like a shield. Veronica spotted her and waved. "Hey, Ruth, did the mummy talk again?" Ruth forced a smile. "He said thank you." Veronica laughed like it was a joke. Ruth didn't laugh back. By the time she reached the nurse's station, her name was already being paged over the intercom. "Nurse Ruth Daniels, report to the legal office on the 4th floor." She didn't even have time to blink. Everything was moving too fast. She took the elevator alone. Her eyes stared at the numbers going up, 2, 3, 4. But her mind was stuck downstairs with her brother, with the words she had whispered to Mr. Douglas. "If I say yes, you have to promise not to hurt me or my brother." When she stepped into the legal office, the same man in the black suit was already waiting. His name tag now visible, Mr. Holloway, Hospital Legal Advisor. "Miss Daniels," he said, standing as she entered. "Please sit." She sat, but barely. Her knees were weak. Mr. Holloway opened a new folder on the table. Inside were more documents. "We'll need your signature here," he said, pointing. Ruth looked down. "What is all this?" "Marriage agreement, legal rights, privacy clauses. You will be Mrs. Ruth Douglas before the end of the week." "The end of the week?" she gasped. "That soon?" He didn't blink. "Mr. Douglas's condition is delicate. He wants this handled quickly." She stared at the stack of papers. "Do I get time to think?" she asked. "You've already agreed verbally," Holloway said, calm as ever. "Now it's just paperwork." Ruth looked away. Her eyes burned. "And what happens after?" "You will no longer be his nurse. You will become his wife. You'll be moved into his care wing. You'll no longer work with patients." Ruth looked up sharply. "You're taking away my job?" "No. We're offering you something better," Holloway said. "You'll be financially secure. Your brother's bills will be taken care of. You'll live under Mr. Douglas's roof. That's part of the arrangement." Ruth's heart beat faster. So I have to live with him? Yes. What if I want to leave later? He paused. Then everything ends. Support, housing, everything. The marriage is key. Ruth stood up. So I'm a prisoner. No, Holloway replied coldly. You're a bride. She felt like throwing up. Later that night, she sat at her small kitchen table while Michael slept in the bedroom. She looked at the documents again. Her hands hovered over them. Her name was printed at the bottom. All it needed was ink. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Keene. Just sign it, Ruth. You'll never have to struggle again. She stared at the message. Then at the bills scattered across the table. Hospital invoices. Pharmacy receipts. Final warnings from the landlord. She picked up the pen. Her fingers shook. Then she signed. One stroke at a time. And just like that, her life was no longer her own. The next day, everything moved faster. Her shift was reassigned. She no longer had patience. No charts. No duties. Just whispers behind her back. She's marrying him? That old man. She must be crazy or broke. She walked past them without a word. Every word burned in her ears, but she kept walking. When she stepped into room 709, it was empty. The bed was gone. A folded note sat on the table. He's being moved. You will see him again on your wedding day. Ruth sat down in the chair beside the empty space. She didn't know whether to cry or run. By Friday, the day had come. She stood in the hospital chapel, wearing a plain white gown borrowed from a nurse who once had a church wedding. It was too loose at the shoulders, too long at the bottom. But Ruth didn't care. The chapel was mostly empty. A few hospital staff sat in the back, whispering. A priest stood at the front with a Bible in hand. Then the doors opened. Two men wheeled in Mr. Douglas. He was dressed in a gray suit, clean and sharp. His white hair had been combed. His eyes looked straight at her. Ruth's heart skipped. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But something in his eyes wasn't cold. It was sad. Like he knew this wasn't normal either. The priest began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Ruth's ears faded out. Her hands trembled as she held the old man's cold fingers. She repeated the vows when they told her to. I do. The ring was small, gold, light. It slipped onto her finger like it belonged there. You may kiss the bride. Everyone froze, but the priest didn't push. He simply nodded. You are now husband and wife. There was no applause, just silence, the kind that filled up her chest like heavy smoke. That night, she was moved into a different part of the hospital. A hidden wing, clean, modern, and almost too quiet. The walls were painted cream. The floor was marble. Welcome, Mrs. Douglas, a tall nurse said with a stiff smile. Ruth said nothing. Her room was large, bigger than her entire apartment. There was a soft bed, a couch, and a desk. On the dresser, fresh flowers sat in a white vase. There was also a door. It led to the adjoining room where Mr. Douglas now lived. She didn't open it. She just stared at it for a long time. Then she lay down and closed her eyes. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because she had no more tears left. The next morning, a knock came at the door. It was soft, slow. Ruth opened it. It was Mr. Douglas. Not in a wheelchair, not being pushed. He stood, slowly, carefully, holding the frame of the doorway. Ruth gasped. You're walking. He nodded once. His voice came out dry, quiet. Only for today. She stepped back. Do you want to come in? He looked around, then entered. Every step he took seemed like it cost him something. He sat in the chair near the window. I wanted to say thank you, he said. Ruth swallowed hard. For what? For giving up your freedom. For someone like me. She didn't know what to say. I'm not what I used to be, he said, staring out the window. But I'm still watching, listening. I saw how you treated me when I was silent. You didn't treat me like a burden. That matters. Ruth sat across from him. But why marry me? He turned to her. Because I needed to know if someone like you still existed. Someone who gives without asking, who cares without pretending. Her eyes softened. I did it for my brother. I know, he said. That's why it means even more. They sat in silence. For the first time, it didn't feel awkward. After a while, he stood again. Rest well, Ruth. You've entered a world you don't understand yet. She blinked. What does that mean? He looked over his shoulder. You'll see. Then he walked out, slowly, one step at a time. Ruth stared at the closed door. Her ring felt heavier now. Not because it was gold, but because it was real. Too real. And she had no idea what was waiting on the other side of it. Ruth didn't tell anyone she was leaving. The hospital packed her things quietly. The paperwork was signed in the back office. No one clapped. No one congratulated her. When she walked out of the building, there was no car with flowers. No cheering. Just a black van with tinted windows. The man in the black suit, Mr. Holloway, stood beside the vehicle. Are you ready, Mrs. Douglas? He asked, opening the door for her. Ruth paused. That name still didn't feel real. She nodded once and stepped inside. As the van pulled away from the hospital, she looked back just once. It had been her second home, the place where she had cried, laughed, worked, and grown strong. Now it felt like a past life. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A message from the hospital director. You've made the right choice. Your brother's treatment is fully covered. She read it, then turned off the phone. She didn't want anyone to contact her anymore. This wasn't a normal life anymore. The drive was quiet. The driver didn't speak. Mr. Holloway just stared out the window. Ruth looked out too. They passed through the city, then past the edges of town, until the buildings turned into trees and the roads became quiet. The sky was gray. The air was heavy. She didn't know where they were going. Where does he live? She asked softly. Mr. Holloway replied without looking at her. The Douglas estate. It's private. She leaned back. I don't know anything about him. You'll learn. That was the only answer she got. When the gates opened, Ruth's breath caught. The mansion stood tall on a hill, with old stones, long windows, and wide doors. It looked like something from a storybook, but with no magic. Felt silent, lonely, too clean. The front door opened as the van stopped. For staff members stood in a line. A woman in black, a butler in a gray vest, a maid with sharp eyes, and a man with a cane. No one smiled. Mr. Holloway stepped out first. Then Ruth. Her white sneakers touched the driveway. Her plain dress fluttered in the breeze. This way, the maid said quickly, without waiting for a reply. Ruth followed. As they stepped through the front door, cold air touched her skin. The walls were lined with paintings. Everything smelled like lemon and dust. You'll stay in the East Wing, the maid said. Where is he? Ruth asked. In his study, the maid replied. He prefers to be alone. The hallway stretched long. Too long. Ruth didn't see any pictures of family. No signs of laughter. Just polished wood and silence. When they reached her room, the door opened to something that looked like a hotel suite. Big bed. Fireplace. A table set with food no one had touched. The maid pointed to the far door. His room is next door. You may knock, but don't expect him to answer. Ruth looked at the door. It was thick, quiet. What happens now? She asked. The maid didn't reply. She walked away and closed the door behind her. That night, Ruth sat alone in her new room. She didn't eat the food. She didn't change clothes. She just sat on the bed, staring at her ring. It still felt like it didn't belong on her hand. Her eyes moved to the other door again. She stood up slowly, walked over, knocked. No sound. She knocked again. Mr. Douglas? She whispered. Still nothing. She turned the knob. Locked. She pressed her forehead to the wood. Are you okay? No reply. She stayed there for a minute longer, then walked back to bed. She lay down and turned away from the door. Her pillow was soft, but her heart was heavy. She didn't cry, but her chest ached in silence. The next morning, Ruth woke up to a knock at her door. She opened it slowly. It was the butler. Breakfast is served in the green room, he said. She nodded. He didn't wait. He walked off. Ruth changed into a simple blouse and pants. Her shoes still made small squeaks on the marble floor as she followed the hallway. The house felt like it watched her. Every painting, every creak in the wood. When she reached the green room, it was beautiful. Sunlight poured through tall windows. The table was long, covered in white cloth, full of silver trays and fresh fruit. But only one chair was taken. Mr. Douglas sat at the head of the table. Ruth paused. He was dressed neatly again, pale hands resting on the table, eyes steady on the cup in front of him. She slowly walked over. He looked up. "You came," he said. "I didn't know if I should," she answered. "You're my wife," he said. "You should." His voice was quiet but clearer than before. She sat at the opposite end of the table, far, distant. He waved at the butler. "Bring her plate." The butler moved quickly. They ate in silence. After a while, Ruth looked at him. "Why this house? Why live like this? So hidden?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out the window. "Because peace costs more than money," he said. She didn't understand, but she didn't ask again. After breakfast, she was shown around the house by a younger maid named Clara. "This is the library," Clara said. "This is the music room. This is the west wing. It's locked. No one goes in there." "Why?" Ruth asked. Clara shrugged. "Orders." Every door in the house had a rule. Every hallway had a silence. Even the walls felt like they were keeping secrets. That afternoon, Ruth returned to her room and found a box on her bed. Inside was a dress. Long, soft, gold. A note lay on top. "Wear this for dinner. D." She stared at the dress for a long time. She wasn't used to silk or attention. That evening, she put it on. It clung to her skin differently, like it didn't belong. She walked to the dining room. This time, the lights were lower. Candles flickered. The table was smaller. Only 2 seats. He was already there. She sat. "You look," he paused. "Comfortable." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not the word I'd use." He gave the faintest smile. "Do you regret this?" she asked him. He sipped his drink. "Do you?" She didn't answer, but her eyes did. He looked at her gently. "I know I took away your normal life. I didn't want a puppet. I wanted someone real." "Why me?" "Because when I was a ghost, you still saw me." Her throat tightened. She looked away. The food was untouched. But something had changed in the room. He wasn't just the patient anymore. He was a man, watching, thinking. And Ruth knew this story wasn't going to be simple. Not at all. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair. She stared at her own eyes. They looked different, older, sharper. She heard a soft knock on the door. She turned. The second door. His side. The knob turned slowly. He stepped into her room, wearing a long robe, leaning on his cane. "I don't want to sleep alone tonight," he said quietly. Ruth froze. He looked at her with no hint of desire, just tiredness, not of the body, but of life. She stepped aside. He walked in, sat on the edge of her bed. "Just let me stay here," he said. She nodded slowly. He lay down, fully dressed, facing the window. She sat beside him on the chair. Neither spoke, but for the first time, they weren't strangers anymore. They were something else. Not husband and wife, not yet, but 2 people, bound by paper, stuck in silence, sharing the same storm. And neither of them knew where it was going. Not yet, but the storm was moving. And the house, with all its walls and secrets, was ready to show Ruth the truth. One room at a time. Ruth woke up to the sound of soft breathing. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the dim morning light slipping through the curtains. Mr. Douglas was still asleep on the bed beside her, his back to her, his hands folded near his chest. He hadn't moved all night. She sat up, quietly, and watched him for a while. The lines on his face looked softer in the light. His eyes remained closed, peaceful for the first time since they'd met. Something about the way he slept, still and careful, made him look less like a stranger and more like someone human. Fragile, even. Ruth got up gently, not wanting to wake him. She walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the mirror stared back at her like it didn't recognize her. Hair slightly messy, eyes tired, the gold ring still on her finger. It wasn't a dream. None of it was. She was married to a man she barely knew. A man who whispered heavy words. A man who owned a house full of shadows. Later that morning, Ruth stepped into the hallway. The marble floors felt colder than usual. Her soft steps echoed lightly. The house was quiet. Too quiet. As she moved toward the staircase, she saw Clara dusting the railing. "Good morning," Ruth said. Clara looked up and nodded politely. "Good morning, ma'am." Ruth hesitated. "Where is everyone?" "Most staff arrive later in the day. Only a few of us live here full-time." Ruth frowned. "It's such a big house. Doesn't it get lonely?" Clara gave a soft smile. "It's always been like this." As Ruth turned to leave, she noticed something strange. The West Wing hallway, the one Clara said was always locked, was open. Just a crack. "Clara?" Ruth asked, pointing. "Did someone open that?" Clara turned, and her smile dropped. "That wing is off limits. Please stay away from there." "Why?" "Mr. Douglas's orders." Ruth looked at the door again. It didn't look dangerous. It looked like any other hallway. But Clara's tone was sharp. Not rude. Just serious. "All right," Ruth said. "I was just asking." Clara nodded and returned to dusting. Ruth walked away, but her mind stayed near that door. Something about it didn't sit right with her. Later in the afternoon, Ruth walked into the library. It was her favorite room so far. Warm light from tall windows, walls covered with books, and a soft couch in the corner. She ran her fingers across the spines of the books. Some were old, some newer. She pulled out a small brown book with no title and opened it. Inside were handwritten notes. A man's thoughts, scribbled pages about time, money, loss. She turned another page and stopped. There was a sketch of her. She froze. It was rough, like it had been drawn fast, but it was clearly her face. Her eyes, her shape. Underneath it, in faded pencil, were the words. "The only one who didn't flinch." Ruth shut the book. Her chest tightened. She turned toward the door. He was standing there, Mr. Douglas, watching. She held the book tighter. "You drew this?" He nodded once. "I didn't know you could draw." "I don't. Not well. Just enough." She stepped closer. "Why me?" He looked down. "Because you didn't look at me like I was already dead." Ruth didn't speak. She didn't need to. They sat on the couch. Not close, just beside each other. "You can ask me anything," he said suddenly. She looked at him. "Anything?" He nodded. "Why don't you talk more?" He chuckled softly. "Because most people don't listen." "I do," she said. "I know. That's why you're here." She looked down at her hands. "Why is this house so strange? It keeps secrets. Like me. That West Wing." He didn't let her finish. "It's not ready to be opened," he said firmly. Ruth nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to pry," she whispered. "I just want to understand what I've walked into." He turned to her, his eyes more awake than she'd seen before. "You've walked into a place built on silence. But you bring noise. Soft noise. Kind noise. It scares this house." Ruth blinked. "Then why keep me here?" "Because the silence needs to end." That night Ruth couldn't sleep. She paced her room, then sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the second door again. His door. She stood, walked over, turned the knob, unlocked. She peeked in. He was awake, sitting near the window in his robe, looking out. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked. "Not since I lost my reason to." She stepped inside. "And now?" He looked at her. "Maybe it's coming back." She sat on the edge of his bed. "Can I ask one more question?" He nodded. "Do you regret marrying me?" He didn't answer quickly. Then finally, "No." She stared at him. I regret waiting so long to find someone like you, he added. Ruth's throat felt tight. I don't know what to do with all of this, she whispered. The house, the silence, the way the staff look at you. He turned his head. How do they look at me? Like you're not just an old man. Like you're something more. He smiled faintly. That's because I was. Once. Was? He looked away again. You'll see. The next morning, Ruth woke up to noise. Clanging. Shouting. Something loud down the hall. She rushed out, still in her robe. Staff were running toward the West Wing. She followed, heart racing. What's going on? She called. No one answered. She stopped near the open hallway, the forbidden one. Inside, two men in suits were arguing with Mr. Holloway. I said not today, Holloway barked. We have a right to see him. He's not dead. You were told to stay away. Ruth stepped forward. What's happening? Everyone went silent. The two men turned. One of them narrowed his eyes. Who are you? Holloway stepped in. She's his wife. Their jaws dropped. Wife? The taller man shouted. That's impossible. Mr. Douglas stepped into the hall, cane in hand. His face was calm. It's not impossible. It's done. The two men turned red. This is a trick. One spat. You're hiding the truth. I'm hiding nothing, Douglas said. Leave. Now. They didn't move. Ruth stepped beside him. She's not part of this, the shorter man yelled. She's the only part that matters, Douglas said quietly. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the two men walked away, their faces hard. When the doors closed behind them, Ruth turned to Douglas. Who were they? He looked at her. Old enemies. Ghosts. People who want what's not theirs. She stared at him. You're more than who you say you are. He didn't deny it. I'll tell you everything, he said. But not yet. She nodded. Her hand brushed against his. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. Whatever this was, it was no longer just paper. It was becoming something real. And real things always come with truths, even ones buried behind locked doors. Ruth could not stop thinking about the men who came to the mansion. All night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Mr. Douglas had gone back to his room quietly. He didn't say a word after they argued with Holloway. He didn't even look at her when he left. The silence was thicker than before. He was hiding something. Something big. Something heavy. And now she knew it wasn't just about health or old age. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. She turned to her side and closed her eyes, but her mind kept running. Who were those men? Why did they call him a liar? Why were they shocked she was his wife? Why did they say he's not dead? None of it made sense. By early morning, she felt even more tired than the night before. A soft knock sounded on her door. She sat up quickly. Come in, she said quietly. Clara stepped inside carrying a tray of breakfast. She placed it on the table near the window, but her hands were shaking slightly. Ruth noticed. Are you all right? Clara hesitated, then nodded too fast. Yes, ma'am. You don't look all right, Clara whispered. The house feels tense. Ruth frowned. Because of what happened yesterday? Clara looked at the closed door of the West Wing, then back at Ruth. They shouldn't have come. They bring trouble. Ruth stepped closer. Who are they? Clara's lips trembled. I can't say. You can, Ruth said gently. I won't tell anyone. Clara swallowed hard. They claim to be family. Ruth froze. Family? But Mr. Douglas always said he had no one left. No children. No brothers. No sisters. No, Ruth whispered. He told me he doesn't have family. Clara shook her head slowly. Everyone in this house knows the truth but follows his orders. Those men come once every few months. They always demand access to him. They always say they deserve something. They always walk out angry. Ruth's heart thumped loudly. So he lied to me? Clara looked down. You didn't hear that from me. Then she walked out quickly before Ruth could ask more. Ruth stood still for a moment, the tray untouched. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was confused. Why lie about family? Why hide from them? Why make everyone pretend they don't exist? Ruth stepped into the hallway and made her way to the main staircase. She needed answers. She needed to talk to someone honest. She found the butler in the dining room polishing silver spoons. "Mr. Henry," Ruth said softly. He turned. "Good morning, Mrs. Douglas. Can I ask you something?" He paused, then nodded. "Yes. You've known Mr. Douglas for a long time?" 32 years, he said. Ruth blinked. "That long?" "Yes, ma'am." She stepped closer. "Those men from yesterday, who are they truly?" His jaw tightened. He took a deep breath. "I cannot speak on that." "Please," Ruth whispered. "I'm his wife. I deserve to know something." He put down the spoon. "Mrs. Douglas, this house is built on secrets. Every wall has heard something it cannot repeat." "That's not an answer," Ruth said. He met her eyes. "Because the truth is not mine to give." Ruth felt a mix of frustration and fear growing inside her. "Fine," she said quietly. "Then I'll ask him myself." She rushed up the stairs to Mr. Douglas's room. She knocked hard. "Mr. Douglas?" she called. No answer. "Please open the door. We need to talk." Silence. Ruth's heart pounded. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made. The window was partly open. The air inside felt cold, as if he had left hours ago. She walked around slowly. "Mr. Douglas?" she whispered again. Nothing. Then she noticed something on the nightstand. A small black phone. Not a smartphone, just a simple button phone. The screen was lit. Call had just ended. Ruth picked it up, staring at the screen. A number was displayed, but no name. Before she could think further, the phone started ringing again. She gasped and almost dropped it. She looked at the door, then at the phone again. Slowly, she answered. "Hello?" she said softly. A deep voice replied on the other end. "So, you're the girl." Ruth's hand shook. "Who is this?" "You don't need to know my name," the man said. "What you need to know is that your husband is lying to you." Her throat burned. "Why would he lie?" "Because he's afraid." "Afraid of what?" The man chuckled darkly. "Afraid of us." Ruth stepped back. "Why? What do you people want?" He spoke slowly, calmly. "We want what belongs to us." Ruth held the phone tighter. "I don't understand." "You will," he said. "Soon. Very soon." Then the line went dead. Ruth stood frozen. Her hands were cold. Her feet felt like they weren't touching the floor. She placed the phone down slowly. The room felt even colder now. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She walked toward the window and looked outside. The front gate, usually guarded by one man, now had 4 guards standing with stern faces. The garden, normally empty, had staff walking in pairs as though waiting for something. Something big. Something dangerous. Ruth left the room and headed straight to the study, the one room he always kept closed. She reached the door. It was locked. She knocked hard. "Mr. Douglas, open this door." No answer. She knocked harder. "I talked to someone on your phone. They said you're lying. They said you're afraid of them. Please tell me what's going on." Still nothing. Her chest tightened. She rested her forehead against the door. "I don't like secrets. I don't like being left in the dark. I just want to understand." The door clicked. It opened slightly. Mr. Douglas stood there in his long dark robe, staring at her. His eyes looked older, sadder, more tired than she had ever seen. "Come inside," he said quietly. She stepped in. The room was dark, lit only by a small lamp. Papers were scattered on the desk. Old photographs filled the shelves. Newspaper articles lay open. Ruth slowly walked toward them. Her eyes scanned the headlines. Douglas Tech founder disappears. Billionaire gone. Family fights for control. Chairman's secret empire in question. She gasped and covered her mouth. Her hands shook. She turned to him slowly. "You were a tech billionaire?" He nodded once. And you disappeared? Yes. She pointed at the papers. Why? Why would you vanish like that? Why lie to everyone? Why hide? He sat down slowly, gripping his cane. Because the people closest to me tried to destroy me. Ruth's heart dropped. He continued, voice low but sharp. They wanted my company, my money, my power. They thought I wouldn't fight back if I disappeared. Ruth whispered, the men from yesterday? He nodded. They claimed to be your family. They are, he said. But they stopped being family the day they tried to end me. Ruth sat beside him, her breathing shaky. And you've been hiding ever since? Yes. She swallowed hard. Why bring me here? Why marry me? Why pull me into this? He looked at her with eyes full of truth now. Because the only people who survive in a world like mine are people who don't want anything from it. Ruth stared at him. Slowly, she whispered, do they know you're still alive? They suspect it, he said. But they need proof. She remembered the phone call. They said they're coming back. He nodded. Which means we don't have much time. Much time for what? She asked. He looked at her, face hard as stone. For the truth you deserve. She stared back at him, fear crawling slowly up her spine. She finally understood. Her quiet marriage was not quiet at all. Her new life was sitting on a storm. And the storm was coming fast. Whatever truth he was hiding, it wasn't just big. It was dangerous. And now she was part of it. She couldn't escape even if she wanted to. Ruth sat frozen in the study, staring at the papers, her fingers clenched around the edge of the desk. The truth was finally in front of her. Her husband wasn't just a sick old man hiding in a mansion. He was a billionaire who had vanished on purpose. Mr. Douglas sat quietly beside her, his hands folded over his cane, eyes watching the window like he didn't want to see the hurt on her face. She turned to him slowly. Her voice came out soft, but her words were sharp. You lied to me. He nodded once. I did. You said you had no one. You said you were just an old man who wanted peace. I am old, he said, and I do want peace. But I also wanted protection. Protection from your own family? She asked. He looked at her now. Yes. Ruth stood and paced slowly across the study floor. I don't understand. You were rich, powerful. Why fake your death? Why disappear? He leaned back slightly. Because I trusted the wrong people. She paused. What happened? Mr. Douglas took a deep breath. His voice was slower now but steady. 10 years ago, I built a company that changed the world. Douglas Tech. We designed smart systems, built machines, created security networks for banks, hospitals, even governments. Ruth nodded slowly. That's why everyone called you the Ghost Tech King. I never liked the spotlight, he continued. So I worked quietly. My name was small, but the company was big. I made billions, Ruth. But I didn't share that power with just anyone. I had partners, family members, nephews, nieces, even an adopted son. I trusted them. I brought them in. He stared straight ahead. But the money changed them. They didn't want to wait. They didn't want to build. They wanted control. Ruth walked back to the desk and sat again, listening closely. They set me up, he said. One day, I was on a flight to attend a board meeting. The jet had a sudden malfunction. But I was not on it. I had sent someone else in my place at the last minute. Her eyes widened. The crash. He nodded. The jet exploded. Everyone thought I was dead. She covered her mouth with her hand. They announced my death the next day. My partners mourned me on the news. My family cried in front of cameras. But within 48 hours, they began moving my shares, breaking contracts, and stealing what I had built. Ruth whispered, They planned the crash? I believe they did, he said. But I have no proof. All I had was a second chance. I took it. I vanished. She looked at the walls of the study again, the books, the files, the layers of secrets. All these years, she said. You stayed hidden in this house. I've moved from place to place, he said. But this house is where I started rebuilding. Rebuilding what? My plan. he said quietly. Ruth leaned forward. And where do I fit into this? He looked at her with softer eyes now. You came into my life by accident. Just a nurse assigned to a dying man. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care about the rumors. You treated me like a person. Ruth shook her head. I was just doing my job. No, he said. You were doing more. You spoke gently. You stayed longer. You smiled when you didn't have to. And you never once looked at me like I was a burden. She lowered her eyes. I started watching you, he continued. At first, just to understand you. But the more I saw, the more I realized you were different. You reminded me of someone. Who? She asked. My late wife. Ruth blinked. She died young, he said. Cancer. Before I became rich. She was kind, simple, strong. Just like you. After she passed, I never loved anyone again. He leaned forward now. But you brought back something I thought I had buried. Ruth felt a tight pull in her chest. So you decided to marry me? Yes, he said. Because I knew my enemies would come back. And I needed someone beside me who wasn't bought. Someone real. Someone who wouldn't betray me. She stood again, this time slower. You could have told me the truth. I was afraid you'd walk away. I still might, she said. He didn't flinch. I wouldn't stop you, he replied. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, she asked, why now? Why tell me everything today? Because they're coming again, he said. And they're coming fast. The moment they confirm I'm alive, everything will break open. The media, the courts, the company, my life. Ruth crossed her arms. And you expect me to help you? I expect nothing, he said calmly. I only hope. She looked at the old man again. No longer just her patient, no longer just her husband, but a man who had carried pain for years behind locked doors and guarded rooms. She sat back down. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to decide, he said. Decide what? If you want to leave, I'll give you enough money to disappear. You'll never struggle again. Your brother will live a better life. I'll protect you from everything. Ruth stared at him. And if I stay? He breathed in deeply. Then we stand together, he said. We fight this war. We go public. You'll take my name. You'll become part of the company. You'll inherit everything if I fall. Ruth blinked. You'd give me everything? I have no one else I trust. Her hands shook slightly on her lap. I don't know how to run a company, she said. I'll teach you, he replied. Every step, every document, every lie they built, I'll show you how to break it. She looked down at her ring. It had always felt like a mistake. Now it felt like a key, a heavy one. She looked up at him again. Why do I feel like this is more than business? He gave a faint smile. Because it is. Ruth stood again and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the wind shook the trees. The guards were still by the gate. Something in the air felt like it was holding its breath. She turned to him. I need time to think, she said. You have it, he replied. But not too long, she added. He nodded. Not too long. Later that evening, Ruth walked alone through the garden path behind the mansion. The sky was turning orange. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Ask him about the sealed red room upstairs. She stopped walking. She read the message again. Sealed red room? She turned quickly and looked back at the house. There was still more she didn't know. And now that the door of truth had opened, it was pulling her deeper in. Her steps grew faster. She wasn't afraid anymore. She needed to know everything. And the only way to do that was to keep going. Ruth stood at the edge of the garden, staring up at the mansion windows. The sky had darkened now. Soft wind moved through the trees, but her mind was louder than anything around her. That message on her phone, ask him about the sealed red room upstairs, kept repeating in her head. She didn't know who sent it. She didn't know what the red room was, but she knew it was connected to everything Mr. Douglas had just told her. She turned around and walked back inside the house. The halls were quiet. She passed Clara, who gave her a curious look but didn't speak. Ruth's feet moved quickly up the grand staircase. At the top, she looked left toward the west wing. The hallway was dark. Most of the doors were closed, but one was painted differently, deep reddish-brown. She hadn't noticed it before. She walked up to it. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a flat wooden surface, smooth and silent. She placed her palm against it. It was cold. She stood there for a while, unsure what to do, then turned and walked straight to the study. Mr. Douglas was there, sitting in the same chair by the lamp, reading from an old folder. He looked up as she entered. "You're back," he said. She walked to him without sitting down. Her tone was calm, but firm. "What's in the red room?" His face didn't change, but his hands stopped moving. "You weren't supposed to find that yet." "Well, I did," she said. "And someone texted me about it. Someone who knew I didn't." Mr. Douglas closed the folder slowly. "The red room is where everything began to fall apart." "Open it," she said. He didn't move. "Please," she added. "I need to see it." He nodded after a pause and stood up. "Follow me." They walked down the hallway. No words between them. At the red door, he reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a thin card. He slid it across a small groove Ruth hadn't noticed before. A soft click. The door opened inward. She stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and old paper. The room was filled with drawings, blueprints, and photographs. Charts on the walls. Dozens of hard drives stacked in boxes. Notes pinned to boards with strings connecting ideas. In the middle stood a long table. On it sat a photo album. Ruth walked to it and opened the first page. It was a picture of Mr. Douglas younger, smiling, standing with a woman who looked warm and gentle. "My wife," he said softly behind her. "Before the cancer." Page by page, she saw the life he had lost. The growth of the company, the birth of the empire, the meetings, the press photos, the sharp rise of everything. Then the shift. Angry emails, newspaper clippings, signed betrayal papers. "That's my adopted son," Mr. Douglas said, pointing to a man in one photo. "He called me father for 10 years, but he was the first to stab me in the back." Ruth closed the album. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry," Mr. Douglas sighed. "This room is my memory. I come here when I want to remember who I was, and who I can never be again." Ruth turned to him. "You're still that man. You're just hidden under too much pain." He looked at her. "You really believe that?" he asked. She nodded. "I do." He stepped closer. "Then help me come back." She looked into his eyes. "How?" "Stand beside me," he said. "Let me teach you. Let me show you the world I built. Not just the one they tried to steal. I need someone strong at my side. Someone who sees me clearly. Someone who doesn't want the money or the name. I only want the truth," she said. "Then we start tomorrow," he replied. "No more secrets." The next morning, Ruth woke up with a new kind of energy in her chest. She dressed quickly and walked to the study. Mr. Douglas was already waiting, a pile of books and papers on the desk. "Today," he said, "we begin with the structure. These are the companies still running under my name from the shadows." He showed her everything: security firms, data centers, technology patents, investments in banks and schools and hospitals. "I kept them alive," he said, "with loyal people." Ruth looked through the files. "This is a whole kingdom." "A broken one," he replied, "but fixable." They spent hours going through numbers, names, signatures, legal traps, threats from his so-called family. Ruth asked questions. He answered every single one. Around noon, she paused and smiled. "You're a good teacher," he chuckled. "And you're a fast learner." In the afternoon, he brought out a folder labeled Air Protocol. "What's this?" she asked. He opened it. "It's the legal plan for transfer of power. You're listed here now. You're the only name." Her heart skipped. "That's a big risk." He nodded. "But the right one." Later, they shared tea in the green room. Ruth leaned back and looked at him. "You don't seem afraid anymore." "I was afraid of dying alone," he said. "But not anymore." She smiled. Then the maid Clara entered with a tablet. "Sir," she said, looking uneasy, "you should see this." Mr. Douglas took the tablet. Ruth walked over and stood behind him. It was a news article. Young nurse secretly marries billionaire tech founder rumored dead, with their wedding photo. Blurry but clear enough. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. "How?" Mr. Douglas narrowed his eyes. "They leaked it. They want attention. They want war. What do we do?" Ruth asked. He looked at her. "Stand up straight," he said. He tapped the table. "Let the world come knocking." By nightfall, more articles flooded the internet. Who is Ruth Daniels? Why did Douglas choose her? Dead or alive? The billionaire mystery deepens. Ruth stood at the window of her room, watching camera flashes spark through the trees beyond the gate. "They're here," she said. Mr. Douglas stepped in quietly. "Yes," he replied. "And now the real battle begins." She turned to face him. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He smiled. "Good. Because I need your help more than ever." Ruth walked toward him. She no longer felt like a nurse. No longer like a lost girl. No longer like a forced bride. She was becoming something else. Someone strong. And in this house full of old secrets and heavy shadows, she was now the light. The front gates were covered with news vans. Large cameras sat on tripods. Reporters held mics, shouting questions over each other. Photographers were standing on ladders trying to get a clear shot into the house. There were whispers everywhere. About the ghost billionaire, about his young wife, about the truth no one expected. Inside the mansion, Ruth stood by the mirror, staring at her reflection. She wore a dark navy suit. Simple, neat, but strong. Her hair was tied back tightly. No makeup, just her bare, serious face. She couldn't believe what was happening. Just a few months ago, she was working late shifts at the hospital, scrubbing wounds, rushing medicine to patients, eating cold food during midnight breaks. Now she was about to stand next to the man the world thought had died. Mr. Douglas stood at the door watching her. "You look ready," he said softly. "I don't feel ready," she replied. "You're more ready than you think." Ruth turned to him. "Will this fix things?" "No," he said. "But it will show them the truth. That matters more." She walked toward him slowly. "They're going to come after us," she said. "The board, the family, the people who wanted you gone." "I know," he said. She stared into his eyes. "Then we face them together." He gave a small nod. "Always." In the grand hall, the mansion staff were busy setting up chairs, lights, and a podium. The room had been silent for years, but now it buzzed with sound. The kind of sound that follows history. Clara stood beside Ruth, holding a folder. "This is your speech," she said quietly. "I thought Mr. Douglas was speaking," Ruth replied. "He will. But they want to hear from you too." Ruth looked at the papers. Her heart started racing. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Clara smiled. "Then you say it with truth. That's what makes it right." Reporters were allowed into the main hall an hour later. More than a dozen media houses showed up. Local news, national news, even international cameras. They whispered and murmured as they saw the setup, unsure if it was real. Then the door opened. Mr. Douglas entered first, walking slowly with his cane. The room fell completely silent. Then Ruth stepped in behind him. Mics clicked. Lights flashed. Every camera pointed forward. Mr. Douglas stopped at the podium. He looked older than ever, but also stronger. He placed his hands on the edge of the stand and began to speak. "I know you're all shocked," he said. "And I know most of you believed I was dead." No one moved. "I let you believe that," he continued, "because my life was in danger, because the people I trusted tried to destroy me, because silence was safer." Ruth stood behind him, listening closely. "But I'm no longer afraid," Mr. Douglas said, "because someone gave me a reason to return." He stepped aside and gestured for Ruth to step forward. She hesitated, then walked to the podium. Her fingers gripped the sides tightly. She looked around the room, at the flashing lights, the staring faces. the judgment in every lens. Then she spoke. "My name is Ruth Daniels," she said. "I'm a nurse. I grew up poor. I worked in hospitals where gloves were reused, where patients shared beds, where I stayed up every night trying to save my younger brother's life." Her voice shook. "But one day I was assigned to care for a patient. Quiet man. Sick. Still. Everyone ignored him. But I didn't." She looked at Mr. Douglas. He wasn't just a patient. He was a person. And what I didn't know was that he was also someone the world had forgotten. On purpose. A few gasps moved through the room. "He trusted me when he didn't trust anyone else," she continued. "He asked me to marry him, and I said yes because I needed help. But somewhere along the way I found more than help. I found truth. I found history. And I found a man who had been broken by people he once called family." She held her head high. "He isn't just my husband. He's my partner. And today, we're here to tell you the truth." Mr. Douglas stepped beside her again. He pulled out a sealed envelope. "These," he said, "are the original documents showing how my shares were stolen. These," he added, lifting another folder, "are the names of the people who planned it." Gasps again. More flashes. The tension in the room thickened. "I'm taking my company back," Mr. Douglas said. Ruth stood beside him as the crowd erupted with questions. "Who are the people involved? Is your adopted son behind this? Did you really fake your death? Is Ruth now your heir?" He raised a hand. "One question," he said. "One answer." A female reporter stood. "Why now? Why speak after all this time?" Mr. Douglas turned to Ruth. "Because I finally have someone to stand beside me." He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. She held it tightly, and they stood there, together, as the room exploded with more questions, more noise, more flash. But Ruth wasn't afraid anymore. She had walked through fear already, and she had come out stronger. That night, the news went viral. Every channel showed the same headline: "Billionaire returns from the dead with secret wife." Some called it fake. Others called it inspiring. Online articles dug into Ruth's past, her hospital work, her brother's illness, her humble apartment. "She's real," some said. "She's after his money," others argued. But no matter what they said, the world was watching now. And Ruth was no longer invisible. She was the woman beside the man who refused to stay silent. 2 days later, they received court documents. The old board of directors was suing. They wanted to freeze Mr. Douglas' assets. They claimed Ruth manipulated him. They said his mental state was weak. Mr. Douglas handed the papers to her. "Expected this," he said. Ruth read through them slowly. "Do we fight?" she asked. "We stand," he said. The next week was filled with lawyers, cameras, reporters calling, former staff trying to reach them, fake friends reappearing, and even threats sent by email. But Mr. Douglas stayed calm. Ruth never left his side. At night, he taught her the deeper parts of the company. How to sign documents, how to read contracts, how to deal with power. "You'll need this," he said, "sooner than you think." On the 4th night, Ruth got another message from the unknown number. "They're planning to strike from inside." She showed it to Mr. Douglas. He stared at it long, then called Holloway, the legal advisor. "Start auditing every internal account," he said, "especially the ones tied to the company trust." The next day, they found it. One of the board members was trying to transfer a massive chunk of shares. He had faked a signature, claimed Mr. Douglas was unwell. They exposed him publicly. The court froze his assets. The tide was turning. On the 7th night, Ruth sat outside with Mr. Douglas under the stars. The garden was quiet. The air was calm. "I never asked for any of this," she said softly. "I know. But I'm not sorry anymore." He smiled at her. "You've become more than I ever expected," he said. She looked at him. "So have you." He held her hand. "What if I don't make it?" he asked. "What if my body gives out before this war is over?" "Then I'll finish it," she replied. He nodded. "You're the daughter I never had." She leaned against his shoulder. "And you're the reason I'll never run again," she said. They sat like that for a long time. The moon watched them quietly. The house, once full of secrets, now stood with its doors open wide. Not everything was fixed. Not everything would be easy. But the world now knew who Mr. Douglas was. And more importantly, they knew who Ruth had become.